Well, we are excited to welcome you to our July Northwoods Financial Series session. Every month at Park City Credit Union, we host a different educational session. My name is Sarah Sturm. I'm a member of the Park City marketing team, and I will be your moderator for today's session. I'm excited to introduce you to our presenter, Mark Hafferman. Mark graduated, go on to the next slide, there we go. Mark graduated from Wild Rose High School. He went on to earn a degree in marketing from Fox Valley Technical College, and then on to Appraisal School in Minnesota. He started a real estate appraisal business in Conover in 2004, and in 2008, he got married. Unfortunately, that same year, the real estate market tanked. Because of that, his fee appraisal work dried up, so he transitioned into assessment in early 2009. Working out of the Hurley Ironwood Assessment Office, he assessed in 45 different municipalities at the height of his assessment career. He traveled 11 months out of the year, which can be very draining. So in October of 2018, he handed off 30 municipalities and kept 15, and then took a job at Liberty Mutual out of Wausau selling insurance. From 2018 to June 1st of 2020, he did both of those jobs. He finally signed his last affidavit in the town of Harrison in Lincoln County on May 30th of 2020. He currently continues to work for Liberty Mutual, selling insurance and managing his rental properties. He resides and splits his time in both Conover and Wapaka. His hobbies include finally being able to spend some time with his wife, Heather, rehabbing homes, western hunting, and fishing. So thank you, Mark, for being with us today. Let's get started. So again, at any point, if you have a question for Mark, please feel free to chat in the side, but we will answer all questions at the end of our session. Otherwise, Mark will just lead us off. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, like Sarah said, my name is Mark Hofferman, and I'm going to go through and, lay out, I guess, the best way to do it is lay out, kind of what an assessor does throughout the course of a year. Everybody pays their tax bill every year, open it up, and, a lot of times, through the years of doing all the assessment, I would have what's called open books and border reviews. And what an open book is a chance for, a property owner slash taxpayer to come in and, question the assessor on how he or she arrived at their assessed value. So how I kind of figured I'd do it is kind of walk from start to finish, and the example I'm going to use starting out is going to be a full revaluation. What a full revaluation is when an entire taxation district is completely revalued. So a taxation district is going to constitute as a municipality. So when you're doing a revaluation, it's going to be everybody within that municipality on a change of assessment. So everything starts off as of January 1st of whatever assessment year it is. Everything goes into a year in the rears. So if a municipality is doing assessment for this year, the assessor's going to look at everything from as of January 1st of 2021 back to January 1st of 2020. Now, during the revaluation cycle, you are going to be revaluing that entire municipality. So what is looked at is the best indication to market value when it comes to revaluation is going to be a recent arm's length sale of a property. So let's just say over the course of 3 years, a municipality has 200 different arm's length transactions, and what happens is that sales data, and it's all extracted out from different subcategories, whether it be neighborhood, style of houses, age of houses, quality, condition, size of site. There's so many different variations that go into value when it comes to revaluing property. But so it's that sales data that's extracted out from the arm's length transactions. When I say arm's length transaction, that's going to be a valid sale that's used. So a foreclosure sale isn't typically used. It's a sale of duress. Another example of a rejected sale would be a sale amongst family members. a neighbor buying it from another neighbor, no exposure time to the open market. It has to meet that criteria to go into building an assessment model. Once again, at arm's length is willing buyer, willing seller, no duress involved, and some sort of exposure time to the open market. So what that data is taken and extracted out, and that's what goes into building an assessment model, and it's a trickle-down effect that creates an assessment for the rest of the non-sale property or the non-sale properties within the municipality. So with that being said, the assessor takes that data and establishes values for the sale properties first, and then that's in turn is what builds the assessment model for creating the values. So you're looking at things so for this year, if we're doing a revaluation, it'd be as of January 1st of 2021. We can go as far back as 3 years. That information is taken. Now, if you have different classifications you have different classifications within the municipality. You're going to have residential, which is going to be Class 1. Class 2 is going to be commercial. Class 3 is manufacturing. Class 4 is agricultural land, which is unique to the state of Wisconsin. That's assessed differently, than everything else, and I'll go into that later. You have 5 and then 5M, which is undeveloped land, and 5M is going to be agricultural use forest, which is another category of agricultural. Class 6 is going to be your forest category, and then you have Class 7, which is going to be agricultural home site plus improvement, and/or it's called the other class. So you have MFL within there too. So what's all looked at then? From that standpoint, a major class is going to constitute for 10% or more of the assessed value within the municipality. So if a major class is out of compliance for 4 years or more within that municipality, that's what triggers the revaluation process. And when that is out, that's when it's necessary. So a municipality can be out of compliance 4 consecutive years in a row on a major class. Once it is out 4 years in a row, Department of Revenue marks it where they have to get back into compliance within the next 2 years. It used to be 7, but they changed the law. I think it was back in 2016. Prior to that, as 5% was considered a major class within the municipality. So if you have residential, is typically always a major class within a municipality. It's very rare that it's not. But so if you have that's out of compliance, 10% or more of the established value. So where that comes into play is equalized value. Equalized value is established by Department of Revenue, and it's established on the subcategories that I just went over. And so if you have a subcategory that is more than 10% of value, such as the example being residential, then if that's what triggered the revaluation to occur within the municipality. Assessed value versus estimated fair market value. Your total assessed value on a property is going to come from what is established by the assessor and is put there. So when you open up your tax bill and you see assessed value and then you see estimated fair market value, that's a common thing. A lot of times folks think that their assessed values and their taxes change every year because the estimated fair market value on the tax bill does change every year, and that's based on the assessment ratio showing that if the municipality is in compliance. So if your estimated fair market value is at 100%, that is going to read the same as your assessed value. And on a revaluation year, estimated fair market value and assessed value should be hand in hand. It's not always going to be exact, but on a year of a revaluation, the assessor is attempting to get the municipality back into compliance, whatever that may be. So if let's just say the assessor has $100,000 or $100 million on a taxation district, a municipality, and Department of Revenue has, we'll just say $110 million on there. So that's 10% over the assessed value that the assessor is holding on it. So what happens, so you open up your tax bill, and what's going to read is going to read, assessed value $100,000, and since it's 10% over, the ratio is going to be 90%. It's the exact opposite of what you would think. And so the estimated fair market value would be 10% higher, and that would put it at the $110,000. The further your estimated fair market value, and that's one thing to look at on your tax bill, and that's going to show the level of assessment in the municipality. The further your estimated fair market value gets away from your assessed value, and once it gets above 10%, where it's at 110% or below 90%, that is what is going to trigger a revaluation being necessary. But you're assessed on your assessed value. We're in a unique state with estimated fair market value and being an equalized value state. And what I mean by that is most states within the union are their assessed values change every year, based on sales. With Wisconsin is unique on an equalized value state because you have Department of Revenue monitoring the sales that the assessor's looking at, and that's what creates the estimated fair market value. And it's not a great way, because you have different, like in a larger city or a municipality with a lot of different waterfront parcels, you have different neighborhoods and different values could be higher, than others, based on the neighborhood it's in. I've had a very unique situation from, starting my, assessment career, in 2009, because it was really tough then, at the open books, we were looking at sales, back then, you had, pretty much the quote-unquote peak was probably mid-2007, but we really seen a dip in 2008. So, it went through a time period where we had really, really good sales, prior to that being, 2007, 2006, and then 2005. So revaluations that were done that time were really unique because we were looking at data that was really, really good. Things were selling good, and a lot of things were selling much higher at that time, as opposed to the assessed values, that were established prior to that. And it was unique and tricky at the same time, because the values that we were putting on places to match up with Department of Revenue at that time based on their sales data, it dropped so rapidly. It was difficult during the open books at that time, in those years, explaining, why your assessed value is what it is, because that's the biggest thing with assessment. Once a revaluation is done within a municipality, that assessed value is essentially locked, for that particular property unless something changes to it. So after revaluation is done, in a municipality, there's really no reason for an assessor to come back out to your property afterwards, and then it falls into what's called maintenance. And the reason why an assessor would stop by your property after the revaluation is done the following year, there's only 3 different reasons for an assessor to stop by. If your property's sold, then the assessor is going to follow up on the sale of the property, to validate it, whether it's an arm's length transaction. That goes into that year's equalized value. The second reason is pulling a building permit. If somebody pulls a building permit, it's the assessor's responsibility to chase it down and make sure that person, did it. And that's where I go back to as of the first of the year. And that's always such an important date in the assessment world, because that's how, the assessor's looking at it. So, if it's only a partial completion on a house, you pull the permit, and it's only a partial completion by January 1st of that year, and then you're just going to have a partial assessment, and the assessor will follow back up the following year to chase down it and to make sure it's complete. Then you'll be moved at 100%, of assessment at that time. But you're still on an old assessment model. So when a revaluation is done, that assessment model is utilized. It does not change. until the next revaluation, occurs. So if an assessor goes out to your place, 5 years after the revaluation, and what you're seeing right now is, building prices going up so high, and that was another common thing. If it was an older revaluation, I had somebody build a brand new house, people were surprised in how less their assessment was versed on, what they paid for it, and explaining the process that, yes, I know that, the prices per square foot and the cost of building has changed, but you're put in an assessment model that was built, if a revaluation was 5 years prior, you're put into an assessment model, that was 5 years old, so we're going off that data. And the reason why it is, in that fashion is to maintain equity, and that's the biggest and the most important part of an assessor's job. You have to be able to explain to the taxpayers where you're placing the assessed value on how you arrived at that value, and the biggest thing is equity. So they call it chasing sales. So if it's after a revaluation, and the easiest one to explain is if it's a condo. If it's a condominium development, let's just say there's 20 different units in there and one sells. I mean, they should all be fairly similar. Just because condos typically are similar for the most part. So we'll use the 5-year-old assessment model. So if this condo sells, 40% above its established assessed value 5 years ago, that assessor can't go in and just change that singular property and leave the other 20, condominium units at the same price they were. It's called chasing a sale. That's rule number one for an assessor, is to maintain equity. And it's not always possible. I mean, that assessor can change that individual property, but he needs to change all the other ones too if there's a good reason. On a non-revaluation year, those are what warrant changes, are, building permits or some sort of change to the property. I mean, the only way that I would ever change a property, during a non-revaluation year in regards to the assessment is if, when I'm validating a sale, I call and, try to get as much information over the phone, because we get that information. What triggers us is, we get all the downloads from Department of Revenue for that municipality. So we get a vast amount of sales, and it's our responsibility to chase down and make sure it's a, a valid arm's length sale. So when I'm going through that process, I try calling, and if I'm not able to call, then I, just simply, Google the address, and that really, the internet is very beneficial, because you are able to see that, yes, it was listed with the realtor, and you can page through the pictures, because if an assessor did not get into the property, there's a strong possibility something was missed. So, the only way I would change a property on a non-revaluation year is if, I go on there and, it says, recently updated and, kitchen, or, added a second bathroom down the basement, or if I would have missed, from missed, where I didn't get in and here they have a fully finished basement. That would be added to the assessment record and is put on the old model. You just enter in the square footage, and then it's going to compute out, what the assessed value. I code it as what's called new construction, code 2. That's what Department of Revenue looks at when it comes to, the different codes when you're coding things on change of value. So it goes into the equalized value when you do that, and you code it as new construction. So now if somebody would call me on that and ask, hey, why did my assessed value change? I haven't done anything differently to the property. Then I explain, through the validation process with it, I noticed that your basement is fully finished. We didn't have that before, and that was added to update the assessment record, and that's what changed, the value. And the third reason for somebody to come, for an assessor to come to a property during a non-revaluation year is if a property owner asks you to come there and they want you to do, a walkthrough. Things changed quite a bit, during the full revaluations were common for a lot of years, and that is the best way to, value property, because when it comes to valuing for assessment purposes, to explain it best, it's really no different than a fee appraisal that you would get for banking and financing purposes, or, if you just want to find out the market value as a particular date, divorce, whatever it may be. assessment is kind of the same process, but you're looking at, a full universe of properties, within that municipality to establish the values on it. To go into the type of revaluations, and this mainly changed. It went away from more full revaluation to exterior type revaluations, and it's not because of COVID. I mean, this kind of changed amongst the municipalities prior. Not to say that there's still not full revaluations, but originally, if a revaluation would be done and the municipality ordered a revaluation for change of assessment, you have to send out letters to all property owners within the municipality, let them know, that you are going to be coming around at this, time frame, and the information we're gathering. But on a full revaluation, it's the same thing as a fee appraisal in the sense you're going through the whole property, you're listing and measuring. When I go up to a property and it's from scratch, you're measuring the property from the exterior, updating the photos, taking notes. If there's no information in the file, if it was handed off from another assessment firm, well, then we're hoping that there's a property owner where you can find, the age of the structure and whatnot. And prior, it would always be a full walkthrough, and it typically took about 10 minutes. But more and more municipalities are going away from that, and it's more exterior only based nowadays, it seems, for revaluation. So you have a full and exterior, which is just the way it sounds. You're just gathering the exterior data from the outside, and valuing it in that fashion. And then you also have what's called an interim market update, where the municipality deems that the assessment information on file is good, and you're just more or less adjusting the assessment model to get it back into compliance with Department of Revenue. And the approaches to value that an assessor uses, the first approach is going to be an arm's length transaction of the subject property. If you don't have that, you are doing a cost approach type model, which when an appraisal is done on a property, in the fee appraisal world, it's tree-like type properties, and taking their attributes and comparing it to the subject property. And then you also have what's called the cost approach, minus depreciation, what it costs to build that brand new. If it's brand new, it's the actual hard cost. If it's an older structure, then you're depreciating it down based on age and wear and tear. Another value that an assessor can look at, and this comes more with income-producing properties, duplexes, fourplexes, apartment building, another example would be hotel. And a cost approach or an income approach to value is taking the overall income and capitalizing it from a capitalization rate. But you have to have, income data or like-type properties where you can extract income data, to hash out an income approach to value. I want to go into a little bit talking about mill rate and how the assessed value and mill rate, because that's a real common question. When you're doing a revaluation or changing assessed values within a municipality, everybody's assessed values changed. How you're taxed on is what is called a millage rate or mill rate. So for Wisconsin, for instance, what creates each municipality's mill rate, and the definition of municipality is going to be a town, city, or village. So if you have any municipality, we'll just use one of mine. I have a place in the town of Conover. So the mill rate in the town of Conover is roughly $10 a thousand. And so what that means is if you have a $100,000 property, that's what the assessed value is on it. It's divided out by 1,000. It's the same way everywhere in the state of Wisconsin. You're taxed on per 1,000th of assessed value on your property that you have. So in Conover on my own, we have $100,000 for the assessed value for the house. Mill rate's $10 a thousand. So you take the $100,000, divide it out by 1,000. And then you times the mill rate being $10 a thousand, so that's going to have a $1,000 tax burden. And so the other house I have is down in Waupaca, and it's a city. Usually cities are a bit higher because you have the services than townships, and the same thing with villages, but it all varies. depending on location. So Waupaca, city of Waupaca, I think last year's mill rate was around $25 a thousand. So I have the same house down in Waupaca. It's a $100,000 house, same as up in Conover. We just picked up that house in Conover and dropped her down in Waupaca. So same exact house. So the same thing applies. You have a $100,000 house. You're located within the city of Waupaca. So you're going to take that $100,000 house and you do it the same way. You divide it out by 1,000. So same thing. You got 100,000. Divided out by 1,000 is going to be 100. Times that $25 mill rate, it's going to be $2,500 of tax burden. Same properties, same assessed value, different location, different municipality, different tax burden. And the tax burdens are derived from 5 different taxing entities. Your largest typically, and not always, but typically is the local school district. That's usually, the largest draw on a taxation burden for a municipality. Then you have local school district, you have your local municipality, whatever that may be. You have the state, being the state of Wisconsin. You got the county, whatever sort of county, you would be in. And then you also have the technical college. So those 5 different taxing entities create one mill rate for that taxation jurisdiction. Depending on how many different municipalities you have within that county, if you got 20 different municipalities, well, you got 20 different tax jurisdictions, within that county. And so you could have two townships that butt up against each other, and we'll use an example of 2 brothers. They both built the house at the same time. One's in one municipality and one's in another municipality. Same. Everything's the same. They're within the same county, but just different municipalities. You could have 2 different tax dollars on both those houses, even though they're the same, because why? They're located in different municipalities. So you could have a municipality that did a revaluation 10 years ago, so that new house is plugged into that assessment model, and then you could have had, the other brothers, they just happen to have a revaluation, so it's put at 100% of market value. Their budgets are going to be different. Each local municipality is going to have, a different budget, and then you also have what's called the equalized value, which we touched on, and that's going to break out, the percentage that is owed, because, once again, we don't change the assessed values every single year. It's the equalized value that helps equalize that portion out. And I like the system in Wisconsin, and the reason being is because you're not changing assessed values every year. It's less of a burden on the local municipality, that taxation district. Because you don't have all kinds of changes every year to the assessed value. It remains solid unless there's some sort of change based on improving it, or something was missed, or something happened to it, or it got damaged before the first of the year, whatever it may be, and it needs to be adjusted because of it. And there again, like with the first of the year, because this is a common thing that I always ran into as well, and that's how it is looked at the first of the year. So like say for instance, so if you have a house fire, let's just say, Christmas Day, so obviously it's not going to be there January 1st, and I'd run into assessment errors sometimes, where nobody notified me, and they didn't pull a building permit, and if they did, it's the following year, and so I'm not going to get that until next year. So the clerk or the county never sent me that permit, but that is the most important date in the assessment world, is January 1st, because that's when everything changes over. So if that happened January 1st of 2020, Christmas, and then we're looking at it as of January 1st, 2021. That house wasn't there as of the first of the year due to the fact it burned down, so it should have been just land only. And if it had a well or septic, that's a private improvement that value goes on. If municipal, it just goes into with the land. But if that house burned down at that time and it was a complete loss, then there would be no assessment on it besides the improvements that stand as of the first of the year. So the house would be removed from the assessment roll, for that year, and they have a full year, before it would be relooked at again. Now, if that same house, you know, burned down January 1st or thereafter, and a lot of times folks have a hard time, and I get it, you know, I mean, wrapping their head around that, because the tax bill is always a year in the rear that you're paying on, you know, so it's being looked at from January 1st back to, you know, January 1st of the following year. So that's why if a house, you know, or any sort of loss would be removed, and that's because, you know, of that date. So that's why there's differences in mill rates between, you know, one municipality and, you know, to another, one county to another, you know, different geographic locations or tax districts, you know, within the state. So the next thing I want to touch on, just because it's a unique thing to the state of Wisconsin, is going to be agricultural use law. Prior to 1999. All farmers were assessed at market value, and market value means, you know, what you can fetch for it, you know, on the regular market. So they're assessed just like anything else. So I mean, if you had 40 acres of, you know, corn, and that 40-acre parcel, you know, the 40-acre parcels are going for $200,000. That's going to set the market value. So therefore, that farmer would be assessed at, you know, $200,000. Use the old $10 mill rate thing again. So $200,000, you know, divided by 1,000 is 200, times 10 is $2,000 a tax burden. Well, they changed the law to the reason the law was changed back then was to help preserve the family farm, and they've adjusted and tweaked it, you know, throughout the years, but not much. I mean, the basic principles are, you know, still there for, you know, on what agricultural use law is. So what was changed is they no longer were a farmer, and you don't have to be a quote-unquote farmer. You know, I mean, it's how the land is used. That's the definition of agricultural use law. So I mean, you could have a 1-acre parcel in downtown Madison where the market value is $1 million, do the commercial of that, but it falls under agricultural use law because they have corn planted on it, and it's allowable. So instead of being assessed at $1 million market value, it's assessed at agricultural use law, which is based upon what an average farmer could rent out on a per acre basis, and then they break it down in soil quality. And most assessors follow the rents that Department of Revenue puts out every year. They do a rent study, and they break it down per county, and then per municipality on first, second, third grade tillable, and then pasture land. It's just the way it sounds. The higher the number, the better quality of soil, and that's where, you know, the tillable land is based on. Pasture land is going to be a rough, rocky, untillable type soil that was abandoned. You have to physically have some sort of animals, you know, pasturing in there. So they're not assessed on the market value anymore due to the fact it's being utilized for agricultural practices. And it's not just, you know, corn or soybeans or alfalfa. I mean, there's all kinds of different things within the state of Wisconsin that do qualify for agricultural use law. You know, aquaculture, you know, raising leeches. You know, you looked at that, and you figure out the size of the pond, and that qualifies. You know, I mean, same, you know, raising fish. You know, cranberry marshes would be another example of something that qualifies for agricultural use, which is a little bit more common. You know, north of Highway 29, tapping for sap, maple syrup, and you don't have to produce it. You know, I mean, the sap qualifies as an agricultural type product, and you can sell the sap, you know, to a wholesaler. But you know, you have to physically be doing something with the product for that land to qualify for agricultural use. So I mean, you can't just plant corn and have it as a deer plot. You know, I mean, you have to physically, you know, harvest or remove some sort of product. But you know what that didn't turn, you know, I mean, and that's why it's classified different than you know, residential or commercial, because it's a different type use, and therefore it's not assessed at market value. Same thing with undeveloped land. Undeveloped land is assessed at 50% of its market value. A definition of undeveloped land is going to be any sort of swamp, and they do it the same way. They break it down. It's by the quality of timber within that swamp. They do the same thing, you know, 1, 2, and 3, and it's based on grading of trees or how wet, you know, it is within there. And another definition of undeveloped is going to be, fallow land. And what that means is if a farmer abandons a field and no longer grows a crop on it, you start to get the long grass and the scrub brush and the underbrush. So that's gonna fall back into undeveloped. And it's a fine line. It's up to the assessor on when that changes from fallow to forest, because once you start growing forest products on there, it should change over to what's class 6, and that's forest, and the same thing. It's going to be a grading system based on that. In turn, it's based. That's where your assessed value comes on, and where that assessor comes up with the land values is the same thing. It's it's derived from sales within the municipality. If you have smaller townships where you don't have a lot of sales data, or I had some municipalities that were, a lot of agricultural land, and a lot of times when you have a lot of large farms, you don't get a lot of transactions because they're family farms. They keep getting handed down, so you can, the best way to explain building an assessment model is, picking up a rock and, throwing it in the water, and, your first ripple is always going to be the best. But, some areas within Wisconsin, we just don't have a lot of sales data. I remember one municipality, I had 4 sales in 3 years to build an assessment model. Well, you have to get creative. And back to the rock thing, the first ripple is always the best, but if you don't have that first ripple, you have to, go out, to other municipalities or other, data to create, to create the assessed value for that municipality. Is there any questions that anybody would have for me in regards to assessment or assessment practices?
Well, I wanted to first ask you a question that came through. I know you briefly touched on it, but just can you explain what the difference is between an appraisal and an assessment? I know you kind of touched on it again, but if you can just kind of give us that difference first. And
yeah, you bet. So there again, an appraisal, there's different. Appraisal, you're appraising value on any particular thing, but in the real estate world, the most common appraisal is going to be a fee appraisal, and it's just the way it sounds. It's an appraisal for a fee. So what the difference is between a fee appraisal and an assessment is the fee appraiser is contracted through whoever's requesting the appraisal. So we'll use the most common one. We'll just use a lender. We'll use Park City Credit Union. So they're hiring an appraiser, even though the client is paying for it. They're hiring an appraiser if there's financing involved, because they're protecting their interests. They want to make sure the value of that house is there. So that appraiser goes out, is hired by Park City Credit Union for financing purposes, goes out, lists and measures a house and tries to find 3 type, comparables. And it doesn't have to be within the municipality. With the assessor's typically looking at sales that have happened in that municipality. And, the assessor can go as far back as 3 years. The most recent, the better, obviously, but you can look at as far back as, 3 years. The appraiser typically can go no further than a year, on it, and they can go further, but they have to explain why. So that fee appraiser is, trying to find the most recent sales that have happened, and they're comparing it to that individual property that individual is getting lending on. So they're looking at, with fee appraisal and the same principles in fee appraisal apply for assessment. But on the assessment variation, you're assessing a particular property, whatever the subject property is, and the assessment is for taxation purposes. So all the principles apply, plus the assessment law that goes along with it on what an assessor can and can't do in regards to valuing. But the assessor is looking at that universe of property, which happens to be the taxation district, and that's how they're figuring the value out, is based on sales data that they have within the past 3 years within the municipality, and all the same principles, apply. And the assessment is that trickle-down effect to all the non-sale properties, and, you know, the same principles. If you have a recent arm's length sale, for the assessment standpoint, that's the best indication to market value. For fee appraisal, you have a recent arm's length sale, but it has not gone through yet. So it's the appraiser's responsibility and job to find comparable like-type properties based on, you know, age, square footage, quality, condition, you know, land size, whether it's waterfront, off water, how much land goes to it. All those different attributes create value to that property, and that's where the appraisal's coming from, and those attributes are used in assessment. But it's just for different reasons, and you have different dates you can look at, you know, in regards to it.
Okay. So I guess this next question would kind of lean more towards like the appraisal side of the conversation. If you're trying to sell your home, but you want to increase the value, what's the most important room maybe to update?
So, you know, it all depends. Every neighborhood, every market, you know, differs. You know, but square foot is always you know, on value. But I mean, if the individual is looking for what's the best thing I can do to, you know, create value. And this isn't from an appraisal or assessment. I mean, I do a lot of real estate stuff myself with renting properties, long term, short term. You know, I've flipped properties in the past, and one of the biggest thing it's going to be kitchens and bathrooms. You know, I mean, there is no catch-all one thing. You know, because a buyer is a unique individual. Every person has their own things that he or she or they or the kids or the school district. There's all kinds of different things. You know, I mean, you know, for me personally, I'm a guy. I like garages. I like working outside. So I mean, it more along comes the line as a personal preference, but the catch-all, which really does, I mean, kitchen remodels are always the biggest. You know, the kitchen is a big thing. Bathroom models help, or creating, you know, bathroom. If you have an exposed lower level house, I mean, putting some sort of finish down the basement, because the exposed lower levels seem to get more value. And when I say exposed lower level, where you have some sort of means of daylight in a lower level, where it kind of more feels like GLA, gross living area, which is square footage above grade. But kitchen, in my opinion, would be the biggest improvement. It also depends on how old the kitchen is. It's kind of a loaded question, but to answer it to the best of my ability, from what I've always seen,
yeah, definitely.
Kitchens
like
and bathrooms.
Whether it's like laundry on a first main floor too. I know a lot of people find that of better value for them too, I think. But so it's a little bit of personal preference is kind of what you're saying, right?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, everything as we know it is, based on supply and, demand. I mean, unfortunately with with COVID, it's affected everything. I mean, everything it has affected. But it's just such, it's such an interesting market. Just to kind of go back to, a little bit, we'll just talk about real estate markets in general in Wisconsin. I mean, from the peak in the middle of 2007, I mean, to the unfortunate, foreclosures, which, the foreclosures had, through 2008 to, let's just say, 2016. The further down the line we got after 2008, 2009, we've seen less and less foreclosures. And I mean, for an assessor, it made things really, really tricky. Because yes, you had to look at every one to validate. I mean, prior to 2007, I mean, typically all foreclosures were rejected. Because it's technically not an arm's length transaction by definition. I mean, yes, you have a willing buyer, you have a willing seller, but they're not really willing. I mean, and there's duress that comes into play. I mean. So when we had all the foreclosures, you know, I mean, it's just like anything else, you know, I mean, if I got two properties side by side and they're comparable and one's listed for $100,000, we have a foreclosure property that's listed for $75,000, I'm going to choose the one for $75,000, I guess, and save myself $25,000. So what happened then is there were so many foreclosures, you know, at that time that it eventually started dragging down, you know, the non-foreclosure properties. You know, I remember we did a revaluation in 2009. You know, I'm not going to name the municipality, but it was nuts. When we did the revaluation, you know, and the ones that really stuck out were like duplexes and condos. On what they sold, you know, I mean, on sales, you know, like say 2008 sales, and we're not really supposed to look into 2009, but, you know, if you're doing your revaluation later in the year, I mean, it's sales data that you still look at, you know, I mean, it was just crazy on how much things dropped, you know, I mean, during that, you know, time period, and people were in a lot of different, you know, situations depending on what it was, and, you know, I mean, you know, starting, you know, 15 and 16, you know, I mean, is when, you know, things started, you know, coming out, and they got progressively better every year. I mean, but you know what it's turned into now, you know, I mean, compared to then, and I mean, to me it's amazing, you know, on how much things dropped and how it climbed back up. I mean, paired sales analysis where you're taking a like type property. And you have to have sales, obviously, arm's length sales. And I mean, looking at the different dates and timelines and seeing what things sold in 2007, all of a sudden that same property sold in, let's say, 2009, you know, I mean, on how much the change on what they bought it for and the next folks that bought it, you know, and how much it had dropped. And then the slow climb, you know, going back up. And, you know, I mean, if you're looking at sales now, I mean, I didn't think I'd see this for a long time, but, you know, I mean, in the peak of the market in 2007, you're seeing a lot of sales selling now higher than the, you know, based on paired sales analysis, and granted the disclosures, every property is different, obviously, and every market's different, but as a whole, I mean, we're back and then some, you know, I mean, and it goes back to the basic principle of, you know, supply and demand. You know, I mean, that's what drives value. I mean, there's just so little supply and so much built up demand, and it's all markets. You know, whether you're in southern Wisconsin, central, northern Wisconsin, primary homes, secondary homes. But the biggest boost I've seen in value changes, you know, I mean, I guess would be you know, cities and, you know, secondary markets. You know, I mean, on the rebound and how they came back.
Right. Well, I have one more quick question, and I have a note here from one of our attendees as well. But, you know, not everyone loves to pay taxes. So is there anything they do to try to, like, make their assessed value go down so their taxes don't increase? Or like, do you have any crazy stories like that? Or does it not really matter anyway because you look at so many different aspects?
No, I mean, you know, I got a lot of crazy stories. You know, I mean, this one pops in my head. You know, I mean, so, you know, I mean, for value to go down after revaluation occurs, there's got to be something that, you know, happened to the property. You know, I mean, you know, and so this was up in Douglas County. I won't name the township again, but I had a property, you know, that, you know, was, you know, foreclosed on, you know, and it, the person that got foreclosed on, I mean, they tore out all the shingles on the house. They tore them all off, you know, it was just shingle, tore off all the vinyl siding, and mind you, this is a 12-year-old house. I mean, tore out all the copper, tore out all the, you know, the wiring, the plumbing, you know, cabinets. I mean, anything that was bolted down or not bolted down. So I mean, you know, something to that, you know, deferred maintenance and the vast amount of change that individual, well, that had a definite effect on value. And I mean, I did adjust, you know, foreclosures. I looked at it. If anybody wanted me to look at a sale, I'd come out and look at it, and I had to look at them anyways. But if a property was beat up or deferred maintenance, that's going to have an overall, you know, effect on value, assessed value, market value, whatever you want to say. That's always that's always going to have an effect on it. And to kind of explain, and before I forget, I guess this just popped in my head, to kind of explain the assessment process when you do have a change of assessment, because this is something that I should have brought up and I didn't write in there. So if an assessor changes your assessed value, just so, folks understand, their due process and what they can do. Anybody can contest an assessed value, so when an assessor sends out a change of assessed value, it doesn't matter if it's, a maintenance year, full, any sort of change of assessed value used to be, $100 or more. Now what it is, it's got to be $500 or more. And the reason why they had capped dollar amounts is with agricultural use law, because we were sending out so much because of changes. But anyways, if there's a change of assessed value on your property, the assessor has to send out a change of assessment letter to you, explaining your rights, as a property owner. And then there's going to be a set, open book, what's called open book date. And, an open book date is where you have the opportunity. Back in the olden days, prior to computers, open book was important because nobody knew what, a neighbor's assessed value is, or what the assessed values are, so we always had 3 different assessment roll books laid out, one for tax identification number, one for address, and one, by last name, so people physically came to open books to see what their neighbor's assessed values are and compared it towards theirs and, argued with the assessor on it or whatever it may be. They could be coming there just for knowledge on why. But now with the change, you can look at any assessed value, on the computer. So you come in and you explain to the assessor on why you feel your assessed value is, too high, or believe it or not, I had some on some occasions why they felt it was too low. And the assessor takes down the information, and it's up to him or her, whether the petitioner, the person, or the taxpayer, whatever you want to call it, brought forth sufficient evidence to deem reason to change it, or if they want the assessor to come in and take a look at the interior, whatever it may be. So if the assessor's got to send out some sort of notification whether he or she is going to, change the assessed value or, leave it the same. And then if the petitioner, or taxpayer, or homeowner is not happy with that, then you have what's called a board of review, and it's an informal, in the town. I can't say informal, but it's formal. But it's your municipal officials who technically, sit on the board. So like in a township, you're going to have the clerk, a town chairman. It's typically 3 people or more, and so I would defend my assessed value, and the petitioner would, show why my assessed value is incorrect, and then the board, whoever sits on it within the municipality, makes a decision, whether they should agree with the assessor or agree with the petitioner, and they have the right to change the assessed value as they see fit. So, if that still doesn't satisfy the taxpayer or property owner, they can pay $100 to Department of Revenue and do what's called a 7085 appeal. And the reason why Department of Revenue does it, so you have a little bit of skin in the game, I feel, the petitioner gets, if they win, or if they're found correct on their assessed value versus the assessor, then they get the $100 back. But that is the informal session where you meet at whatever Department of Revenue office it is. So if it's out at, Wausau, you would meet down there and you sit down as an informal, session with Department of Revenue, and the same thing applies. The assessor, explains why they feel the assessed value is right, and the petitioner does, and that's the last of it, and then you're on to next year, and the person can contest their assessed value if they wanted to every year. We were really, really busy when the market was down. That creates a lot of work for an assessor, especially when, folks are seeing a higher, or a lower assessed value, or an estimated fair market value versus the assessed value when the estimated fair market value is higher than the assessed value, which it's, the good way or whatever you want to call it out of compliance. You don't hear too much from taxpayers in regards to anything. But yeah, the down markets raised a lot of questions, and the main reason is assessed value versus estimated fair market value is always the most common question. Why am I assessed this way?
Thank you. That was great information. I was going to ask that too, and I forgot, so thank you. But, well, we are ending our hour of wonderful information on assessment and appraisal, so thank you again, Mark, for all of your information. And if any of you have questions for Mark, I do have his information here up on the screen. You can contact him after the fact, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. But again, thank you all for attending today's Northwoods Financial Series session. For those that have joined us live, you will be put in a drawing for a $10 gas station gift card, and we will reach out to you soon to arrange pickup for that. So if you don't hear from us, I'm sorry you weren't a winner, but if you do, congratulations, and you can thank Mark for that. But our next session will take place on August 24th at 10 a.m., and David Bremen will be with us from Bremen Merrill Ford to discuss how to navigate the car industry in today's world. So we should have more details and a link to a registration page for that later on, either this week or early next. If you are interested in attending that session, it will be posted soon again. So again, thank you all for attending and have a great night.